Before we begin, here's how to earn continuing professional education credit for attending this session. Gain valuable insights by attending the podcast, then complete the assessment test to download your certificate. To do this, follow these simple steps. Click on the link in your description to access the session. Create a free account and attend the podcast. After the podcast, take the assessment test and download your certificate. It's easy, and it's free. We highly recommend checking out our subscription. Let's get started.
And now, I would like to tap into your experience. You've been on the front lines of policymaking for quite a while. So where do you see the biggest gaps between intent and execution?
So I think this question is interesting because it has evolved over time. Like you see the goals of policymakers have changed. There's within the Republican Party, which is the party that drove this bill, there has even been a shift between what they did in 2017 and what they did this year. In 2017, it was a true tax reform. They lowered tax rates and they eliminated a lot of credits and deductions and exclusions in a way that in the sort of classic tax reform formula of broadening the tax base and lowering tax rates. This bill kept rates low, but they added a bunch of new tax exclusions, credits, and deductions into the tax base, making sort of doing half of the tax reform puzzle, but leaving that other half unaddressed. And so Republicans often talk about wanting to simplify your taxes, being able to do your taxes on a postcard, and that is not what they are doing here. Tax paying is going to be more complicated, and to the extent that politicians want to be providing those special sort of treatment through the tax code, there is no way to square that circle. You can't have simpler taxes and a tax system that incurs special benefits on particular constituencies. And so that evolution in Republican tax policy making is noteworthy. This transition from focusing on simplicity and getting the government out of economic decision making.
Welcome back to We're Trying to Figure Out. I'm Saul, and today I'm joined by Adam Michel, Director of Tax Policy Studies at Cato Institute. If you follow US tax and fiscal policy, you've probably seen Adam's work. His analysis is cited everywhere from Wall Street Journal to the Washington Post, and he's even been on Fox News, CNN, and CNBC breaking down tax reforms. Today, we're diving into the One Big Beautiful Bill, what it really means for taxpayers, businesses, and policymakers, and where the US tax policy might be headed. So let's find out what's so beautiful and not so beautiful about it. Welcome, Adam. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. Now, Adam, before we dive into the tax weeds, I always like to start with the journey. You've worked at places like the Heritage Foundation, the Mercatus Center, and even with the US Congress's Joint Economic Committee. And now you're leading tax policy studies at Cato. So what first drew you into tax and fiscal policy?
Yeah, so I was initially drawn to policy making in general. I think it's the intersection of sort of government and the private economies is interesting across many different dimensions. And so I studied economics in school. I got my PhD at George Mason University in economics, and I fell in love with tax because it touches everything. There's a sort of tax angle to healthcare markets, to labor markets, you name it, there's a tax angle. You want to talk about macroeconomics, there's a tax angle there as well. And so I got into the policy world in 2017, in like the lead up to the 2017 debate in sort of 2013, 14, when there was research being done on sort of the lead up to the last big tax reform we did. And the rest is history.
Yeah. So was there any pivotal moments early in your career that really shaped how you look at government budgets and taxation today?
I think my view has been evolving, obviously, my entire life and career. Both my parents are accountants, so that
Okay.
probably informed my view to some extent and helped me end up where I ultimately am. So sort of broadly keeping it in the family, although I am not a tax lawyer nor an accountant. The so that had to have played a role. I think when I was entering this space, the debates that were happening here in Washington, as I just said, certainly informed the sort of specialty that I chose. And then I spent time on Capitol Hill, as you mentioned, at the Joint Economic Committee, and I helped lead the committee. I covered a broad swath of economic issues, tax being just one of them, fiscal policy. We were there during the height of, I was there during the height of the COVID inflation, so I spent a lot of work on inflation, and I ultimately came back. I came back to Cato after that stint in government, and I wanted to get back into tax again because it has this sort of broad swath, but is also a specialty. And so I feel like I've sampled a lot of different areas of economic policy making, and I keep coming back to tax and fiscal policy.
Brilliant. I love it. I've always found it interesting how tax policy is where politics meets economics head on, and your path seems like the perfect example of that collision. So now let's get into the bill that's been blowing up my inbox, and I'm pretty certain of lot many other people as well. The one big beautiful bill. At MyCPE, we've had hundreds of hours of tax content that has suddenly turned upside down because of this legislation. So from your vantage point, what is the essence of this bill?
So it's really difficult to distill down to one essence because the bill, as part of the name implies, is so big. It covers more than just tax, right? It's the Republicans did this through what's a process called reconciliation, which
Yep.
allows them to change both spending and taxes. They made many of the 2017 tax reform changes permanent. They added a whole bunch of campaign priorities to the bill, and then they also made a bunch of spending reforms. And so
Yeah.
the bill covers all of those things, and it does some of them well, and it does some of them quite poorly.
Yep. So like if I were to ask, like why did this have to happen? Was this more of about economics, or was it politics, or was it a mix of both?
I think it was a mix of both. It was the expiration of the 2017 tax cuts, if you remember back
Yeah.
under Trump's
Yes.
first term. It's called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. They cut taxes across the board. In some ways, they simplified tax paying. In other ways, especially for businesses, it may have become more complicated, especially in the international realm. But
Yep.
most of that was expiring at the end of this year, and
Yeah.
so there was both a political imperative to keep taxes from going up by close to $500 billion on Americans, but there was also an economic imperative that tax increase would have economic consequences as well. And
True.
then politics, as it is, just keeping what you already have is not great politics. Stopping a bad thing from happening, you don't always get the political benefits that you get from doing a new thing, incurring new benefits to people. And so Trump ran on a whole host of new tax benefits that were ultimately included in this bill. And so it was that sort of economic imperative plus the political cliff plus the campaign priorities that ultimately drove the legislation.
Brilliant. So one of the things that professionals always keep asking me is, okay, so who comes out ahead and who is going to struggle with this? So who are the clear winners and losers from this legislation?
Do you want to earn CPE credit? Take this course of MyCPE 1 to earn free credit. Click the link in the description to get started.
So I think the clearest winner is all of the tax lawyers and CPAs out there that get to bill additional hours to figure out all of these changing pieces. But beyond that relatively flippant answer, I think winners are pretty broad if you look at the baseline and assume that taxes would have gone up. It cuts
Yeah.
taxes across the board for Americans at almost every income level. There are sort of deeper winners, like people that are going to benefit from the new no tax on tips or no tax on overtime. Seniors will benefit. There's a larger senior deduction. And then there's also business benefits. The biggest one is making full business expensing permanent. This is a reform that was made in 2017. It was expiring. They brought it back and made it permanent. And then if you're a manufacturer, that full deduction is expanded even more to structures if you're engaged in manufacturing. And so there's sort of lots of winners depending on which of those categories you fall into.
True that. I couldn't agree more on it, because I guess there's certain industries like the green energy or the manufacturing, like you rightly mentioned, they benefit more about it. The manufacturing with the credits that are tied to the domestic production benefit heavily, while I guess the high income taxpayers in certain states may also see higher effective burdens. But am I getting this correct?
Uh, so there was the for high income taxpayers, the top tax rate didn't go up, so it stayed low. They actually
Mm-hmm.
expanded the state and local tax deduction,
Mm-hmm.
moving the cap from $10,000 to $40,000. So that actually will lower tax burdens on some of the highest income Americans in higher tax states. The phase out is pretty steep, so that might increase a marginal tax rate for some people in the phase out. But broadly speaking, taxes will go down or stay low for even higher income Americans. You mentioned the sort of green energy sector. If you were relying on tax credits for new solar development or new wind, one of the things that was changed in this bill was rolling back a lot of the tax credits that were included in the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed under the
Yes.
Biden administrations. And so if you're in some of these sectors that were where tax credits were rolled back, they're not rolling back tax credits that people are already relying on, but if you were planning on relying those in the future, you should expect the federal government to subsidize those projects a little bit less.
Interesting, interesting. Well, enough taxes, but let's talk about the other side of it, the policy making process. You've been close to the policy making process. We often hear what lawmakers say when they're trying to accomplish, but implementation often looks very different, right? So what so what do you think lawmakers intended with this bill?
I think lawmakers came to this bill with the goal of keeping taxes from going up, and they did that successfully. But
Right.
the political process necessitated this log rolling exercise of once Trump ran on all of these special preferences that we already mentioned, no tax on tips, overtime, larger deduction
Yeah.
for seniors. And once you open the tax code up for special preferences for particular groups, then everyone wants to get their piece in the
Yeah.
bill. And so the many lawmakers then came to this process with the idea that they could get their special carve out or credit either expanded or made permanent in this bill. And so we see that across the board. There's new or expanded tax credits for employer provided childcare at the place of work, for paid family leave that's being provisioned by employers, for larger deductions for student loans that employers are paying. There's special provisions for seafood processors or in aquaculture. There's a larger biofuel tax credit. You look at some of the powerful senators, like those from Alaska, got special provisions for Alaskan whalers and native communities. And so I think many lawmakers came to this process looking for all of those special carve-outs, and they got many of them. And so that you mentioned implementation. Ultimately, what that means is that each of these provisions will add new complexity to both tax paying and tax administration. And so, particularly folks that are going to have to help taxpayers navigate all of these changes should be looking for the interpretation of each of these things that comes out of Treasury, because the Congress often writes these big, complicated laws and then sort of washes their hands of it. But there's thousands of pages of regulation that have to implement this all, and there's lots of ambiguity left in the statute Congress wrote. And so that's the next stage as we're looking ahead, is sort of what is a customarily tipped industry that is then eligible for the tip exclusion, being one example. There's a bunch of regulatory questions around the green energy provisions, and a lot of those are big open question marks right now.
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE One Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now.
True that. And now, I would like to tap into your experience. You've been on the front lines of policy making for quite a while. So where do you see the biggest gaps between intent and execution?
So I think this question is interesting because it has evolved over time. Like you see the goals of policymakers have changed. There's within the Republican Party, which is the party that drove this bill, there has even been a shift between what they did in 2017 and what they did this year. In 2017, it was a true tax reform. They lowered tax rates and they eliminated a lot of credits and deductions and exclusions in a way that, in the sort of classic tax reform formula of broadening the tax base and lowering tax rates. This bill kept rates low, but they added a bunch of new tax exclusions, credits, and deductions into the tax base, making sort of doing half of the tax reform puzzle, but leaving that other half unaddressed. And so Republicans often talk about wanting to simplify your taxes, being able to do your taxes on a postcard, and that is not what they are doing here. Tax paying is going to be more complicated, and to the extent that politicians want to be providing those special sort of treatment through the tax code, there is no way to square that circle. You can't have simpler taxes and a tax system that incurs special benefits on particular constituencies. And so that evolution in Republican tax policy making is noteworthy. This transition from focusing on simplicity and getting the government out of economic decision making to one where they want to be more activist and sort of doing away with that simplicity narrative or mandate, if you will.
Very, very interesting. I love the way you put it. So really thank you for sharing that perspective. Now, one thing I find fascinating about your work at Cato is that you don't just look at a single bill. You step back and look at the tax code as a whole, right? So if you had to describe the direction of the US tax policy right now, are we moving towards simplification, or are we just layering complexity on top of complexity?
Yeah, so where this bill layered complexity on top of complexity. I think there was a bright spot in 2017 where we did move a step towards simplification. We eliminated some of the itemized deductions. They simplified how children are treated in the tax code by eliminating the personal independent exclusion and doubling the child tax credit. That was a simplification move. It didn't actually expand the subsidy for children. It was just a consolidation, which is a good reform. In this bill, they made all of that permanent, so that those were making simplifications permanent, but then they layered on all this a new political junk. I think the question about where the tax code goes from here is really an open question. You can't continue to narrow the tax base and keep tax rates low. And so as the budget deficit continues to balloon, Congress is seemingly unwilling to cut spending. They will need new revenue in the future. And the question is, does that pressure lead to just higher tax rates on a narrower tax base? Or does that lead to coming back and re-examining the tax base, eliminating more of these, a lot of the stuff they added, the new Trump no tax on fill in the blank are temporary. They expire after 2028. So maybe they let those expire and broaden the tax base further, and that would be that would sort of get back to first principles. But we are at an inflection point, and it's a very much an open question which path Congress ultimately chooses to take at that sort of next big forcing mechanism, which will be when a lot of this stuff expires.
I love it. Now, we all have had that moments in our lives wherein when you've been into an industry for a long time, you always come to those points where like, if I was in his place, this is what I would have done, So if I were to just from an opinion standpoint, right? What do you think the US tax system should look like in the next 10 years?
So I am at Cato here. I actually, before this big bill passed, we put out a tax reform plan that showed how policymakers could, if they eliminated all of the junk in the tax code, all the unnecessary credits, deductions, exclusions, broadening the tax base as much as possible, how low could you lower tax rates? How much could you simplify and get rid of unnecessary excise taxes and the rest of it? And we show that if you truly broaden the tax base to its fullest extent, you could lower tax rates to near 100-year lows. You could lower top marginal rates to 25% on individuals. You could lower the corporate tax rate further, all the way down to 12%. You could lower capital gains and dividends taxes. And you could do all of this without changing the amount of revenue the federal government is bringing in. And so my North Star is a consumed income tax that has one flat rate that everyone pays. That's my North Star. But we can get 90% of the way there if Congress actually wants to remove all the special treatment in the tax code. And so a lot of my work is trying to show Congress how we can take incremental steps in that direction. How do we eliminate more distortions in the tax code and use that savings to lower tax rates? Because in economics, there's a classic result that the economic damage of a tax increases exponentially with the tax rate. And so if you can lower tax rates, you get big economic dividends, especially if you're doing that by broadening the tax base. And so that's my North Star.
Interesting. Well, I mean, like, I guess the only thing certain in life are death and taxes, right? So those are the things that.
And in the one big beautiful bill, they made the larger estate tax exemption permanent. So even fewer Americans are facing taxes at death.
I like that. Every time I talk to a CPA, simplification feels like a holy grail, but somehow things just get more complex. So, as we come towards the end, most of our listeners are CPAs, tax advisors, or finance professionals who have to live with the consequences of these changes. Yeah. So if I were to tap into your professional acumen, what are the top 2 or 3 things they should be focusing on as they adapt to the one big beautiful bill?
I think it depends on who your clients are. If you're helping businesses sort of navigate a lot of these changes, the most important thing is to watch for the regulatory implementation on expensing, as I mentioned, is retroactive. Sort of how does that play with the business decisions that have already been made? If you're helping green energy credit clients, there's a lot of uncertainty there. So watch, sort of be prepared to navigate all of those changes. And if you're helping individuals, it's important for people to know that many of these changes actually go into effect this year. So when you file your taxes, 2025 will have a lot of these changes of exemption on tips and overtime and the rest of it. And so folks will need to get up to speed pretty quickly. And again, there's a lot of open questions. So watch, I'm sure, read MYCPE as this stuff comes out, and follow a lot of the Treasury guidance, and be ready for big changes when you actually start helping folks file their taxes.
Absolutely. And Adam, before I let you go, obviously MYCPE has got its own gold mine of resources, but together with that, it's if our listeners wanted to keep up with your work and insights, where should they go?
Yeah, so you can follow me on all the normal channels. I'm active on X and LinkedIn, but I have a Substack that I write at regularly, at least once a week. It's called Liberty Taxed. It's a blog on U.S. tax policy, and you can follow me there, Adam N. Michel. And that's how I distribute all of my writings. They're also usually posted at cato.org with all of my other colleagues' work on a broad range of fiscal policy, international relations, immigration policy, and the rest of it. But you can follow me. The best place to follow my work is Substack at Liberty Taxed.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, Adam, this has been a great discussion, and and to all our listeners, everything that Adam has mentioned, we will be dropping those links in the show notes, so you can connect directly with Adam and also and Cato's work, and also follow him for all the great things that he's doing with the tax policy administration. And with that, I thank you again, Adam, for helping us figure out the one big beautiful bill. And I also want to thank all our listeners for tuning in. That's it for this episode of the We're Trying to Figure Out with Saul. Until next time, take care and keep innovating in everything that you do. Cheers.
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE One Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now